The new 15.4 patch for TFT is one of the biggest updates that they have done in a long time. This is such a content-packed filled patch that we can justify calling it a mid-set. There's item reworks, a complete balance overhaul to trades, units, and power-ups, and there's even new power-ups also that creates more comps. So the meta has been completely upended, and now we are in fully a reroll patch. Is it true that you can only play 5 reroll comps right now, and there's only one single fast 8 comp? Not really. There's some truth to it, but there's actually a lot of things that you can do. Let's go ahead and jump into the TFTAcademy tier list and find out what exactly are the playable comps and how do we play them. Here are a couple tips that will give you some edge during the reroll patch if you're not familiar with how to play this meta. The first rule that I think you have to do is commit, and you must commit early. This is basically done through looking at your items and your units. These are the most important things, even more before your augments. You look at your items and your units in stage 1, and you think about what you can actually play off of this. If you don't understand what you can play with it, you're already going to struggle on this patch. So if you're in a situation where like, do I hold this Gnar? Do I hold this Lucian pair? Am I going to be holding on to Malphite for the potential reroll? Or do I hold on to Kaisa versus Jhin? And you're like thrown off by all these different possible rerolls. The important thing to understand is, do these things work together with my items? Don't just tunnel off the units. Don't just tunnel off the items. Make sure they work together at the very beginning of the game. The second thing that I want to drive home is a very important concept in general is tempo. I'm circling every composition that's going to be rolling on stage 3 to get stronger. And that's not assuming some of these 3-cost rerolls are also just like rolling a little bit to improve their boards. So if you're playing a composition that is like trying to fast 8, no wonder you're getting overrun on stage 3 because all of them are upgrading their board and you're just sitting there trying to not roll while getting to stage 4. So the pragmatic takeaway is stop trying to lose streak and instead slam all your items. Play a strong board. It's okay if you win, lose. Take an econ augment instead or an item augment to make sure that you're strong and try to actually fight for the win. Remember, you actually get gold for winning rounds, so it's not the end of the world. You can't just lose all of stage 2 and lose all of stage 3, then roll down in stage 4 and then don't hit your board and then complain that you low rolled. You have to actually play a tempo line, and that is the most frustrating thing about reroll lines. The rule for me is 4. Do not have more than 4 components on your bench. If you do, you have to slam an item. Just slam something. Do not let 4. 3 is also arguable as well. Maybe you have to slam 3 components, but 4 is where I absolutely draw the line. And perhaps one of the most important tips I can give you is don't be afraid to type the composition you're playing in chat if you're playing on PC. I know this is cringe to some people because it feels like calling comps is weird, but the reality is if you type in chat, it will help other people who are on the fence. Like, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to play Kaisa or I'm supposed to play like Jhin from here or something like that. They're trying to figure out their line. If you do type in chat, on average, people will be influenced by that positively. You're going to have a couple of games where people get mad and just like rage contest you anyways, but on average, if you're playing a high volume of games on the patch, this will save you a lot of headache in the future. Just trust me on this one. The #1 most consistent comp in the game currently is Fan Service Reroll featuring Rakan and Xayah. This is a composition that you're going to roll on 6. You're going to look for Xayah 3 and Rakan 3, and you're going to be looking for specifically a power-up combo of Fan Service on both Xayah and Rakan. And if you get it on one of the units, you are guaranteed to get it on the second unit. So if you get fan service on Rakan, you're guaranteed fan service on Xayah. And it's important that you actually try Rakan first because Rakan is more likely to get fan service than Xayah is. If you put it on Xayah, you might get offered a bunch of utility ones. And these are some of the ones that are offered in case you don't hit fan service. Let's say you roll it on Xayah first. You can take Sky Piercer, Solar Breath, things like that early on. Same thing with Xayah. Same thing with Rakan as well. But because the pool of Xayah is just way bigger, you're much more consistent putting on Rakan first. And so one tip you could do would be to just make sure that when you get your second fruit, unattach everybody and then put it on Rakan first and keep trying on Rakan until you get fan service. And Riot changed it this way because it was really frustrating to miss. Like basically you try to play fan service Xayah Rakan and you would put the fruit onto the units and it felt like it was missing really consistently. But now basically the odds are if you unfruit about 3 times, you pretty much should be close to guaranteed to getting it. So you can't really miss as long as you put Rakan first. The composition wants to play around 6 protectors and either Jinx or Yasuo. The stats are pretty close between if you want to include Yasuo versus Jinx. A lot of people would prefer the Yasuo because you get a mentor and edgelord. But Jinx does a really good job, and that's actually even surprisingly close, even at 1-star Jinx, because the average place doesn't change. You can try to look at the delta, right? This is the place change that might indicate that it's a little bit better, but Jinx actually has a higher win rate, and specifically, Jinx is really good if you can play around tiny team. Tiny Teams is one of the strongest augments you can have in the game for pretty much any composition that plays around 1, 2, 3 Star Guardians, and it just gives an insane bonus. It single-handedly made like 3 or 4 different compositions you can play if you hit Tiny Team, but the best one by far is Fan Service, and if you can get Jinx, it's just way stronger. The other really important thing about this composition is your itemization. A lot of people have this interpretation that Fan Service is driven by Xayah, and that makes sense because a lot of people are going to be typing things like Xayah in chat, and a lot of people build items for Xayah. But the item priority, in my opinion, actually is driven by itemizing Rakan first, because Rakan is what stalls for Xayah. If you have a weak Rakan, it doesn't matter if you have perfect items for Xayah, your front line is going to crack and they're going to get to the Xayah and assassinate her. So Rakan is actually the first unit you build items for. And so a lot of times what dictates whether or not it's a good fan service game is if you have Archangels first and not something like Rageblade. In fact, Rageblade, I think, is the third bow usage for this composition. The first bow you want to go towards pretty much like Titans or Kraken. The reason why we have Kraken here is to show that that's the first item for Xayah. To be a little bit more technical, we probably would put like something like Archangel Staff, Bow Vest, and then Kraken last, because you want the first bow to actually go towards Rakan to make a Titans resolve. First rod goes to Archangels on Rakan, first bow goes to Titans or Kraken, and then you can do like Rageblade and Giant Slayer. As a result, because of this composition is so heavy on specific item components, Pandora's is also really good for this composition as well. It's actually kind of hard. This is one of those compositions where I feel like we could have like 3 or 4 rows of augments to show you the good ones that you would want to play, because all these are good, and you can also justify picking some other ones as well. I think the best econ augment is Too Much Value for fan service. I think this is one of the big econ signals to go for it, because you can also field a good level 6 composition to get 3 free rerolls a turn. You can field Xayah, Rakan, Janna, play Shen, and then play 2 other units while you're stalling and getting some free rerolls. Trying to get too greedy with it though, because obviously tempo matters, and because it's a reroll lobby, and we talked about this at the beginning of the video, it's really important that you are strong for stage 3. Otherwise, you're just going to take too much damage going into stage 4 when everyone spikes. The other important part of this composition is that you do actually care about Six Protector and Cassante. Cassante is the person that takes leftover items and utility. If you can't get something like Even Shroud and Sunfire, just go for Last Whisper and Red Buff on Jinx. Red Buff is also really good on Xayah. Don't feel like Giant Slayer is mandatory here. The other variation of fan service that you need to know is that this is also the best composition to play Double Trouble, because 2 Xayahs and 2 Rakans are very, very powerful. So if you're able to get basically the same exact setup, you just play Double Trouble on that. It is kind of hard to pull off because, well, one, I mean, the fact that you're going to be down an entire augment until you get to like a certain amount of Rakans and a certain amount of Xayahs, so you might fluctuate in power level. But also, you don't get to really play a lot of the benefits of, you know, the vertical protector, or splashing in Star Guardian is going to be tricky. You might just splash into Yasuo here if you can't find the Jinx. So there's a lot of different like elements about this composition that's a little bit trickier, but still really, really good. So if you get an opportunity to just play around Double Trouble with Xayah and Rakan, 2 Xayahs, 2 Rakans, and then you drop 2 Protectors. The other composition that is in S tier is Heavyweight Malzahar. This composition is a little bit weird. I think intuitively it doesn't make a lot of sense, because you're like, why would I play Malzahar with a bunch of physical damage dealers, especially heavyweights, which is a composition that scales with HP and AD. But there's a couple reasons why. The first is that it's a really easy frontline for Malzahar and Wraith. In fact, it's the only reliable Wraith frontline because you just can't skip to Cassante. So it's a very cheap front line. You're going to be playing 4 heavyweight, which is really easy. It's like Zac, Aatrox, Kabuko +1, and then you have Malzahar in the early mid game around Syndra. The second is that they buffed 6 heavyweights. They buffed Poppy, they buffed Wraith, and they buffed Malzahar. So this is pretty much just stacking everything that got buffed in the patch into one neat little package, and just the totality of all the small increments of advantages have made it that the composition is actually really good. And if you're able to hit like the max power of it, which is 3-star Darius and 3-star Malzahar, you can win the game. It's actually pretty reasonably high cap. There's a couple of recent discoveries that are starting to push the build and evolve it further, and I'm finding out about this, you know, during the tournament as players are revealing the tech to compete. And so this, part of the reason why we don't have it on the site is because it's not like popularized yet. It's sort of the thing that people are figuring out. It's like, it could be wrong. It's innovating tech. But the thing that I want to talk about is that I think a lot of people are not building Morello on Malzahar nearly as much. If you want to optimize for like what you want to build with the item order, because again, we're talking about like how to succeed in the reroll meta, have to itemize correctly in the right order because tempo matters. Void Staff is really important. And then you want to build AP, and you want to start building mana items for the Malzahar. I see people go Void Staff, death cap and then blue buff, or, you know, adaptive, or something that just helps him generate the mana to cast. And then you just have Morello or Sunfire just like go on the front line instead. So that's like one thing that people are doing to get kind of an edge, because Morello is good on him in the early mid game, but late game, you kind of want something else. In terms of power fruits, the best one by far is Shadow Clone Malzahar. It's actually doing too much damage. I wonder if it's some sort of bug that's doing like unintended amount of damage, but overall it's like basically doing like too much right now. So that is by far his best one. I think Mage is actually currently bugged, where when he casts, he actually has to auto attack and then cast again, which slows him down a lot. So it's a pretty big deal because he's trying to spam cast as much as he can. So probably try to avoid that if you don't get Shadow Clone. And the other fruit is just whoever's your frontliner. You could go for Kabuko 3 if you don't find Poppy. You can also go for like Jace 3 as your tank. You can obviously put items on Darius. It doesn't really matter who your second fruit is. Just put on whoever's your most consistent unit. I think late game is probably strongest on Darius 3 with 3 items and Malzahar, but that's going to be rare to get, especially because, and we're going to cover this throughout the entire tier list, but Darius is pretty contested. There's like a reroll Darius, there's also Kaisa Darius, and other people might be playing Malzahar line. Darius 3 is not exactly easy to get. If you can't find Darius 3 and you're stuck on Malzahar 3 only, you're probably going to just play for top 4, but hey, it's a really, really consistent top 4 comp. Some of the best augments for the composition are Rig Shop. You can get like the 3 costs going and you will have a huge edge. Ring the Bell just is Ascension for heavyweights, so that's pretty good. One augment that we probably want to add here is the Death Cap augment. It's called Deadlier Caps, I believe, and it is something that gives you a straight up Death Cap immediately, so you can just like build Voice Staff Death Cap immediately on like a Lucian or Syndra, or even the Malzahar, and just start stacking up that AP. It's very, very good. If you do get a heavyweight circlet, it's actually really nice because it gives you the Poppy. So I personally like heavyweight circlet a lot in this composition. One of the rare circlets that are actually good for the comp. And also want to give a special shout out to Magic Roll, because Magic Roll, pretty much all the outcomes are really good. A permanent HP buff, great synergy with heavyweights because heavyweights scale off of HP. You get 4 components, 4 belts, great. 4 tiers, great. 4 rods, great. 4 swords, perfectly fine as well. So you actually can use all the components. And then you also get like a pile of champions, a bunch of 2 and 3 costs. Well, there's a handful of 2s and 3 costs that actually can fit pretty well in this composition. So it's kind of hard to miss with Magic Roll. So I really like it for this composition in particular. Let's talk about some Malzahar variations. He's actually so good and flexible that you can play him in a couple different ways. The first is that if you can't reroll heavyweights because the heavyweight frontline is too contested, there is a Rammus Prodigy version of it. The only thing is that it's kind of hard to pull off, and one of the biggest signals to go for it is his best artifact, Blighting Jewel, which we actually listed right here as well. Blighting Jewel is a really big enabler for Malzahar, so if you can get it, it just really works well with the way Rammus stalls. So you can try to go for a Rammus 3 frontline, but you don't have to play around Blighting Jewel. You could definitely just play like standard Malzahar the same way. It's just that this is like one variation you can play. Just play 2 protectors, Rammus, double tank with Cassante, and then just play 5 Prodigy. The other variation that is starting to become more popular as well is to play around 4 Wraith and Flex. And the duo carry kind of changes from game to game, but the most common one that you'll play is Jinx. Malzahar, Jinx, and Jhin. So you get Prodigy, Wraith, and Sniper. Connect that to the heavyweight with Zac and Poppy, and then Cassante activates with Nico. So the number one thing about this composition is that you do want to go to 8 and roll for this, as opposed to rolling on 7 for the other Malzahar lines, but it's pretty expensive, and you're playing on some units that are really hard to hit, like Cassante, for example. So if you can't hit Cassante and you're stuck here, it's not worth playing the 3 Wraith. Instead, you can drop Zac, for example, and play a Kabuko. Kabuko is like a 2-cost heavyweight, and he has Mentor. Let's say you're not finding Jinx whatsoever, and you're just stuck on Jhin. You can go ahead and play Gnar, and instead of playing around Nico because she's a protector, you have a cheap unit like Rel, and maybe you high rolled something like Braum. And now all of a sudden you have a kind of a different core where you're flexing around a bunch of different active traits. And so this is just like one concept you can play as like a cheaper board. And the whole goal of the Malzahar Wraith flex composition is so that way you can get to level 9 and eventually replace things like Jhin with Varus and then cap really high. And then you can work your way back into the entire line and slowly but surely piece everything together. It's a hard composition. I think that this is something that you should play from ahead, but this is to give you one option in case you are contested, right? Because the number one most complained about thing about this patch is that what do I do if I'm contested? They just pivot into you. Do I have no other choices? You do. You can actually just abandon the reroll of Malzahar because it's going to be hard to hit 3-star everything. And you can push levels instead if you hit the Poppy. I think the signal for this is to play ahead. You have the AD items for Jinx and you had the early Poppy. You can definitely make that happen. Soul Reaper Viego is our first composition we'll talk about in A tier. Viego Reroll is very quickly climbing the ranks because he is the new artifact god. Anytime you open up a portable forge or an anvil, you pretty much should be able to hit something for Viego. He's really good with range extension, good with flicker blades, good with defensive items like Zhonya's Paradox, good for fighter items like Wit's End. Even things like Static Shiv could be really good because it has synergy with his third attack. And Viego just has a lot of stats that are really, really strong. And also, there's a lot of good combat augments that synergize with him. Like Keepers is really good with him, or you can play a bunch of the other things that like synergize with melee carries. And I think Viego in stage 1 is just an extremely good unit to play around because he just does, I think, probably the highest raw DPS of any like 1-star in the game. Like 1-star Viego out DPSs everybody. And if you have Rageblade and Edge of Night on him, you just pretty much steamroll a bunch of comps. The most important power up to think about him is Stretchy Arms. You could also go for some of these other scaling ones like Not Done Yet and Weights, which are also really good. They're basically like a way to, you know, close the gap and stay alive and be really tanky. But Stretchy Arms, it has really, really good synergy with Viego because it keeps him basically constantly attacking and gets his next attack comboing really well. But another alternative that's really good with Viego is if you get Trickster, it will fundamentally change your positioning. So let's go ahead and open up the builder and show you. If you do have Tricksters with Viego, you actually kind of want to solo frontline him. Something like this, you could justify moving up a little bit, but the whole point is that you want Viego to take damage and then teleport to the enemy team. Like, let's say if your opponent is playing, what's the most hated unit right now? Let's go ahead and play Xayah, right? Everyone hates losing to Xayah. If they're playing Xayah in the corners and you play Viego, oh, by the way, if you play Tricksters, you don't want Edge of Night anymore because it delays the TP and is generally pretty bad. Let's just, you know, let's just put like a death cap or something on him. Hodge, death cap, JG is fine. But anyways, you have him take damage. And he's going to TP to the enemy corner, and then all these other units move up, which is really, really powerful. So you want him to solo front line. But the thing is, you can have him biased towards a certain way because Trickster will always dash to the farthest unit. And so you can have him on A3, for example, and then he's going to dash all the way over here to the Xayah. Or you could have him invert exactly to the other way, and he's always going to dash on this side as well. So make sure to really utilize Trickster Viego to manipulate and take advantage of the fact that a lot of people are really careless with the carries. So that's definitely some tech there to keep up your sleeve if you hit Trickster. The thing is, though, Trickster is actually a rare power-up. If you look at the weight, it's 5 compared to 10. And if you look at some of the trait-specific ones, I think we had fan service, for example. That's a weight of 20. So, you know, fan service 4 times, you know, or maybe even more likely to show up than Trickster. So you can't like fish for it. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And then the other thing about Viego is that if you're playing Stretchy Arms, make sure that you have him get the takedown on a weak champion. So if you're playing Stretchy Arms Viego, after you hit him on 7, you're like, oh, great, I have Viego 3. I push for Soul Fighters. Make sure you have him killing the weak units so that way you extend his range. Very similar to Gangplank, if you remember Gangplank from the beginning of the set. Leftover AD on Samira, but you also can reroll Lux 3, which we'll actually talk a little bit about. His the other variation, or Lux reroll, actually kind of plays around Viego as well, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Mentor Mech Ryze, still an extremely good composition, and it did get nerfed in a couple ways. Ryze is worse, Socialite is worse, but that just means that you're not nearly as stable on 1-star Ryze. Now you kind of have to hit a little bit more. But the comp has innovated a little bit. The first is that you actually want to play around duo carry Volibear and maybe like less emphasis on Yasuo. This gives you a little bit more flex options. You can actually roll down and flex your 8th units, which, believe it or not, is actually kind of a rarity this set. Most of the time when you're rolling down, you're actually just rolling down for very specific units. Like Xayah Rakan is almost the same units every single time. Soul Fighter Viego is the same thing. Cruise, we'll talk about a little bit, is pretty much the same thing every single time. But you actually have an 8th slot that could be a lot of different units depending on your items. The most common is Volibear because Volibear 2 is actually very good. Some people are arguing whether or not Volibear 2 is even that much worse than Lee Sin 2, just to give you a frame of reference in this composition. And he has some really good synergy with the way you can like have full melee walk up and confront the enemy front line, and then Volibear can like sneak into the back line. and assassinate. So Volibear is definitely the most common 4-cost you play around, but you can still play around Akali. You can still play around 5-cost like Lee Sin, Xayah, and Yone. And that also might be a trigger whether or not you like flex in other different parts of the composition if you're not hitting the mentor. So it's actually a composition that has a pretty decent skill ceiling in terms of like how you position, the units you roll down with, and how you play your early game. Your early game is what's really, really important. So make sure that you're trying to play around Lucian 2 as best as you can, win streak, and play from high tempo. I think a really common mistake for a lot of these players when they're going into mech is that they over prioritize, trying to like take econ augments and then just like don't have any combat or items. This composition is actually very item heavy, and you do want combat augments, things like keepers or water lotus or other things that just like enable your power is actually really important. So make sure you try to have a good balance of like the one item, one econ combat if you do end up taking econ augment. Otherwise, I've seen people take double combat and it ends up paying off really handsomely. But the difficulty is that this composition tends to want to play from ahead, and if people contest you, that can be really tricky to hit. So make sure you just use some critical thinking there. But this is by far the most consistent 4-cost line in the game right now. I would say it's much more consistent than the Jinx comp that we're going to talk about, as well as Soul Fighters, which recently got demoted on our end. The thing about Socialite on Aatrox is it actually got nerfed in terms of its rarity on Aatrox, because Aatrox has a new power-up called Mecha Blade, and that is his carry power-up, which actually has made it less likely that Socialite shows up. So one tip about this composition is save every Aatrox you find, even if you 2-star him. If you have 3 Aatroxes and you see another Aatrox in the shop, pick it up, because you might need to try and juggle more fruits, because you don't want to use every single fruit into Socialite and then you have no refreshes on Ryze, because Ryze does want to be the other person that takes it. Also, we probably want to update it as well, but I think another really good power-up is Efficient, and I think that one's really strong as well. Killer Instinct is really strong if you have something like Fishbones or Sniper's Focus, because you just target the lowest health enemy in range, and that extends your range a lot, so something just to think about. You also still can go for a Senna and Yasuo reroll variation where you roll on 7, but this is like if you hit Rig Shop and you know you're uncontested. And if you're rerolling around Senna Yasuo, you probably would rather just play around Drift Duos, which is the Lucian reroll, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Protector Crew Sniper is kind of an enigma. This composition got nerfed really hard because Malphite got nerfed really hard. Now his passive gives way less armor and he gets a lot less HP. But I think because of the nerfs to a lot of comps across the board, and they buffed other aspects of crew, that sort of compensated and kept them power neutral. And that was enough because comps like Ashe and Yuumi got nuked, right? So it's like really hard for them to deal with the influx of reroll. This is a reroll comp, and it keeps up in tempo, and it feels like kind of even-ish. So if you're able to get a good start for it, which is a lot of copies of Malphite, a lot of defensive items, and maybe you hit like a really good econ augment like Prismatic Ticket or something like that, Pandora's Bench, still a really solid reroll comp to go for. It does tend to struggle a little bit with people picking apart it by contesting elements of it. In the past, it was like kind of hard to hit Cassante and Nico because those are just like popular units, so you might not be able to hit them. And they are important. It is important to actually get Cassante too in this composition. But Jinx is more popular, and also Jhin reroll is starting to become more popular, which is, sneak peek, climbing up the tier list on a daily basis. It might even be higher by the time this video is posted. So just keep in mind that this composition is not nearly as easy to pull off as before. You kind of have to have a better spot for it than just like, oh, I have 2 Malphites and a vest. It's time for me to play snipers. You just keep in mind that you probably have to have a good augment, because when you hit and how fast you hit is really, really important for this comp, because you don't want to fall behind. The power-ups haven't changed that much. Standalone did get nerfed, now gives 30% HP instead of 35, which probably means that body change is just better because it gives you a 30% HP shield plus an ally, so that's really good. I probably favor body change over standalone, but standalone is still solid, especially early game. And then with Jhin, it's pretty much the same thing as before. Make sure that if you have Spirit Sword, you have Infinity Edge and a lot of crit, because you want to make sure that every single time he auto attacks, he crits. So that way it guarantees us that 40% bonus damage damage, which is a lot. But if you don't have a lot of crit, let's say you have Death Blade and Rage Blade, Giant Slayer, and you have just the base 25% crit, you're probably not going to crit that often, so Spirit Sword actually loses a lot of value, so you go for Artistic KO in that instance, because Spirit Sword only really good if you have a really high amount of crit. Kaisa is still, in my opinion, the highest cap reroll in the game, largely just because she just gets stronger and stronger. So she has inevitability through the form of her passive that just gets a lot of AD. And if you can get Darius 3, but she did technically get nerfed in terms of the patch, and she also got nerfed through the popularity of Darius. It's just hard to hit Darius 3 now with Malzahar reroll. So she is really good, but it's hard to actually get to the cap ceiling of this. So the difficulty of Kaisa is actually reaching your peak potential. Her itemization has changed this patch. Instead of going for like a Shojin, blue buff is superior, and it actually opens up more power-ups for her. You could do like Gather Force, for example, as a way because she just casts more often. And the rework to blue buff specifically benefits Kaisa a lot because she gets extra AD and AP thanks to the rework, and that is going to snowball her even further. So basically, best in slot is IE, Last Whisper, and blue buff. But the reality is, with Kaisa, it's very much important just to slam items for tempo. So even though we show you what best in slot is, I see a lot of players like struggle with Kaisa because they're just greeting so much. They have like 5 components on the bench because they have like 1 glove, 1 tier, 1 bow, and they're like, oh, Infinity Edge is really important. I'm not going to slam this Last Whisper, or you know, I don't want to slam and not have blue buff. Just slam the items. You need to kill units in order to get Kaisa to snowball. It doesn't matter if that blue buff is 10% better than Shojin or 15% better than Shojin. If you're going to lose another 3 to 4, 5 rounds in the stage because you just kept your items on the bench for being a greedy. Just make sure you're not like overly scared and conservative in terms of like slamming your items. Just be very aggressive with it and figure it out later. There's 2 different versions of Kaisa that people still play, which is the Mentor and the one around Rammus. And that's pretty much just due with your level 6 roll down. If you roll down to 6 and you hit, Rammus 2, obviously you play around Rammus, but maybe you don't hit Rammus at all and you hit Kabuko 2, you should definitely be holding those Kabukos, play Kabuko for a bit, and then maybe you eventually hit Ryze on 6. Because you're rolling on 6 so much and, you're just going to see a lot of 4 costs, even those low odds, you pick up Ryze. That might be a signal to just avoid trying to go for Rammus, because if you get too late of a Rammus with Monster Trainer, you're just not going to be able to get it to work. So we'll see. Next patch, they are reworking Monster Trainer to not require the EXP. I'm curious how this impacts this build. But for now, just keep that in mind when you're rolling on 6. If you don't hit the early Rammus, be willing to pivot. Crystal Gambit is stronger this patch, and it's better as a composition as well as like an early game start. The reason why we have this composition is just to kind of tell you that Crystal Gambit is just more playable. In reality, I think this composition is probably like the bottom of A tier, maybe like back to B tier, because it's just kind of hard to pull off. The reality is reroll comps are just so dang powerful that it's going to be unlikely you can ever reach critical mass with Crystal Gambit easily unless you are high rolling. Like, it might be even more accurate to say that instead of like a Crystal Gambit emblem, you probably want like a Crystal Gambit like Wandering Trainer, like a dummy or a golem of some kind, because it feels like you kind of need to have that reason and excuse to play it. Otherwise, you're just gambling on whether or not you can hit like a Xayah, and that's really, really hard to get to. So this is just more about Crystal Gambit is just like an actual loose streak composition you can play in the early game now because they buffed the gems. And I would probably suggest doing loose streak into like Mentor Mech or loose streak into like 3-cost reroll and trying to go for some kind of artifact or econ that way. So if you do end up playing in 7 Crystal Gambit though, it's pretty straightforward. Just get 7 Crystal Gambit, win streak with it, get a bunch of kills, cash out a bunch of rewards, snowball, and emote your enemies while dancing on their board. Fusion Dance Darius is also an insane composition, and I mean, it just goes to show you how popular this guy is. He is a really good duo carry for Malzahar, really good duo carry for Kaisa, and he's also a standalone. He can solo carry as well, and it has to do with Fusion Dance specifically on Darius. You're supposed to eat Jace 3 with a bunch of sword items. It might be confusing that we have 3 BF swords, but it's to show you that you just Fusion Dance and just eat Jace with any sword items in general, because it absorbs 45% of their stats. So put like Death Blade, put a Sterex Gauge, whatever sword items you can get to get this AD higher, just fuse it so that he becomes really strong. And I really like going for either Socialite, because obviously Socialite is just busted, but you can also go Classy on Jace 3, and he gets 40% more stats. That 40% affects the heavyweight trait. That heavyweight converts to AD. That all piles into Darius. You're just funneling. It's literally like Goku and Vegeta fusing and putting their powers together and becoming Gogeta and defeating the big bad Broly, who I guess is... Do we have a super tank this set? Maybe Malphite, I guess. You basically can bust through any super tank. And as long as you have Giant Slayer, which recently got buffed, It's definitely a really, really powerful thing. But the number one problem with this is whether or not you can hit Darius, and it's just how contested heavyweights are, because you definitely are going to have a lot of trouble hitting it. Also, it's kind of hard hitting all the swords, right? We have IE, GS, and just sword, sword, sword. So we probably should put Sword Overflow in here, or Pandora's, just to show you. So mental note of that to change that for the tier list. Smolder ends up being the backline just because you play 6 heavyweight, but you could also play Supreme Cell, and you can also play like a lot of other different units. So don't feel like you have to play Smolder. It's just that he's a free anti-heal. If you have Smolder, you don't really need the Sunfire. So just keep that in mind. At the very end of A tier, we have a special variation of Star Guardians that plays around Tiny Team. Tiny Team is extremely powerful this patch, and they reworked the Star Guardian trait to give stronger individual bonuses and worse team bonuses for more Star Guardians. So that's made Star Guardians actually weaker. So this is kind of like bleeding a little bit into the B tier discussion. But Star Guardians they're okay. They're like mid, and they're not that great this patch. Quite frankly, I wouldn't really want to play very often. But if you get Tiny Team, I'm down to play around Jinx, because that turns it into a very powerful carry. And you want to play around Jinx, Poppy, and Nico for a while until maybe you can try to go for somebody else in the meantime if you can't really find some of these units. But Tiny Team Jinx is very, very good. And for the same reasons why it's really good with this Malzahar is that it's flexible. You can actually combine it and literally play Tiny Team variation of this while cutting things like the Syndra, for example. So you definitely have like options at your disposal. Best in slot Jinx is not Rageblade. This is probably one of the most misunderstood things about Jinx, is that a lot of people just think Rageblade is really good, but she actually has built-in Rageblade already through her passive. Attacks just give stacking attack speeds. So basically putting Rageblade on her is like giving her double Rageblade. You don't actually need it very much, especially if you end up playing around something like Hyperactive or other power-ups that give her extra attacks. You don't really need that Rageblade. Instead, you want real power. But Kraken is very good, and the rework the Kraken still has synergy with Jinx, so just get that stacking AD and then fire off. So I think this new build with Giant Slayer and IE is probably her best in slot. But if you have Rageblade, just slam Rageblade. Again, this is a patch where tempo matters so much. Don't overly greed your items. Commit them to the board, because if you spend so much time greeding, you're just going to get ran over by the reroll. Slam those items and try to grab as many placements and preserve your HP. Let's go into the B tier, and I'm going to talk about half the B tier a little bit more in depth than the other half, because quite frankly, I think the upper half of B tier are a lot better and more consistent, and you're going to be playing them more often than you will the bottom half of B tier, which are rarer but can be good in the right circumstances. The first composition is Soul Fighter. The conditions for Soul Fighter is 1, you open up with good items for Soul Fighter, specifically Samira, things like Infinity Edge, Glove Sword, combos, even Tears are good for her. She's really good with Shojin and Blue Buff, just anything. Giant Slayer is also really good. The second is that you have Neferi 2 to play around, because Neferi as an opener is insane, and Kalista still does a lot stage 2. She falls off after stage 3 starts, but it's a really good opener, and you can play into 4 Soul Fighter with maybe even the Viego. You have to play Soul Fighter from ahead. You cannot play it from behind. It's not something that you take Soul Fighter Crest, lose streak, and then you hope that you hit Gwen. I think that those days have long passed us for this patch at least. You have to play from ahead and leverage that in order to get the 8s and look for the whole Soul Fighter package. But if you can get that and snowball your lead, it's pretty good. It's just definitely a composition that needs to hit Gwen in order to reach its peak power. But if you play your spot right, you should be able to hit it pretty uncontested, and you should be able to get to 9 and get the whole board together. Another situation you might find yourself playing Soul Fighter is you have items like these, and you just can't play Kaisa because, well, 1, you don't have Kaisa, or maybe you're contested and other people are playing Kaisa. You also were like thinking about slamming, sword items for Mentor, or maybe you were even thinking about like Darius reroll, just all these different like AD starts, and you're like, oh, I can reroll. No, you can't, because everything else is contested. Just play Soul Fighter if you have the opener for it and the items. So that's another scenario where you might find yourself playing Soul Fighter. The comp is quite exceptional with the Soul Fighter emblem, because it lets you hit without depending on Gwen. And also, there's some really good carries with it, like Volibear and Braum are really good with Soul Fighter emblem, especially if you can find a way to play them together for the Bastion and the Luchador. So those are really good signals to try to play into Soul Fighter. We talked about this earlier, but there's a new composition on the block that rerolls Lucian and Senna for Mech, and it's called Drift Duo. It's a power-up that Senna and Lucian can get, where they both get 3 mana regen, no matter what. And if they're both 3-star, you get +1 Mighty Mech to your trait. So this ends up, we don't have game playing here, but this should say 7. It's just that the builder doesn't detect it. And you get 7 Mech for free, without having to hit Yone. And the reason why we have Yone here is because you play Gangplank until you hit Yone. There's two things I want to say about this Drift Duo. The first is that this 3 mana regen is pretty good, but you still want to have blue buff. That is really important for Lucian. I think his best in slot build is blue buff, Jewel Gauntlet, and Giant Slayer. But if you can't get that, you can play like Nashor's Tooth or Death Cap. Just get like damage on him with blue buff, because he will nuke and do really hard amount of damage to a lot of solo frontline. He might have some of the best single target burst for a 1 cost in the game. So if you get him 3-star, he actually can do a lot. The second thing is that Drift Duo itself on Senna sometimes bugs out. So if you have Drift Duo on the Senna 3, sometimes it deactivates. And I'm not sure what that condition is. So just to be safe, don't play this composition unless you get Drift Duo on Lucian. Even though it technically buffs both of them, you don't need to have it on 2 of them. In fact, you can't. Drift Duo only affects 1. It's not like Fan Service, where Fan Service gives you buff on both Xayah and Rakan. It is not like that at all. You just get Drift Duo on one of these units. Instead, you probably play Socialite on Aatrox, or you can go for something else like Mana Rush Jarvan, so on and so forth. I really like this off of like Prismatic Ticket, Pandora's Bench. Worth the wait. Build a Bud Lucian is also a really good signal. Try to go for it. That's definitely a reasonable thing to chase. I don't know how I would chase it if I had Aatrox 3, though. I don't think it's like, oh, I hit Aatrox 3, build a Bud. I should try to play Lucian. That probably doesn't mean that. You should instead probably try to push levels and play around Mentor Mech. If you're in a situation where somehow you hit Yone and you don't think you're going to get to Senna 3, it's okay to just like not chase Senna 3 and instead play 7 Mech with Yone and Gangplank. That's like on the rare side, but that is not impossible, especially because Yone is not a popular character to pick up off Carousel. Maybe you're rolling a lot on 7 for Senna 3 and you just hit Yone. You can actually just stop and go for 7 Mech there. And don't even worry about Drift Duo with Senna 3. Some people might be wondering why Ryze in the front line, and the answer is that Mech is a carry unit in this composition. When you play the Mighty Mech, you want the Mech to actually not take that much aggro. That's why we play Poppy for heavyweight. That's why we're playing this Ryze in the front line. Don't let this Mech actually take too much burst, especially if it's like a Jhin or a Darius or a Kaisa focusing it, because then the Mech dies and you lose a bunch of damage. The Mech is like Gwen. If it can get to its 3rd cast, it's going to do a ton of damage, big AoE, but if it doesn't get to that 3rd cast, nothing happens. So that's why we position like this. Kayle Rerolls back. They buffed Wraith, and that helps her a lot. And it's not just helping her with her top end damage, it also helps her with her mid game survivability, so that way she can get to level 9. They also buffed other elements of this composition, like Malzahar is better now, so you can start to itemize him as a dual carry for Kayle. They also buffed some of the heavyweights as well, so it ends up just being a pretty solid comp to play for. In the past, we played like 6 Juggernaut Kayle, but 6 Wraith is definitely the best form of it, so try to stack the Kayle with Wraith if you can. It's really hard to actually pull off Kayle, though. I feel like the thing about Kayle is that you might have Kayle 2 with Rageblade, and you're like, oh my goodness, it's a Kayle game. It has to be Kayle. You know, I have such a good start. It's a reroll meta. But the problem with Kayle is that every gold that you spend on getting Kayle 3 just puts you further and further behind at getting to level 9. So I've seen people have amazing Kayle spots, right? They have Heroic Grab Bag, they have Stars Reborn, they have like all these different things that help them hit the Kayle. And then they are rolling for the last 1 or 2 Kayles, and they roll from 50 gold at the beginning of stage 3 to 10, and they still don't hit, right? And that's a situation where your game could just literally end on the spot because you just can't ever get to 9, even if you hit the Kayle the very next round, because you just nuked your entire economy. So that's one of the things that's really dangerous about Kayle, but it's one of those like live or die by the blade here. So like, you know, the Kayle is extremely powerful if you can get her guaranteed, which is why I think Worth the Wait Kayle is insane. You just push levels, don't even reroll. And then you can just like find a way to get to 9 and do a lot of damage late game. Kayle actually has a lot of flexible power-ups now. Double Strike was something that we played a lot previously because they nerfed over 9,000, but you can go with over 9,000. Max speed might actually be okay for that very same reason. We'll see. But Hero's Arc for leveling is also pretty solid. Don't feel like you have to go for one specific one. Kayle is generally pretty good with a wide range of power-ups. Speaking of Wraith units, Jhin Reroll is back, and his buddy Mundo at the front line actually got buffed this patch. And that's mainly because Luchador got a rework where they no longer like drop aggro and jump away from their target. That was a nerf to Volibear and Braum, but a buff to Mundo, because the problem with this composition was that you would solo frontline Mundo, you put him in the front, then he would jump away and drop aggro, and the enemy would walk up and attack your Jhin. So it was a problem before. Now that doesn't really exist. So they actually buffed this comp significantly in terms of like the mid-game interaction or the mid-fight interaction. And so it's back now. And so you can definitely play Jhin Mundo. Jhin is still really strong. Same exact setup with like the power-ups and everything that we talked about. The only thing is that this directly contests the crew players. So you probably could play Jhin Mundo if there's like one crew player because they roll slower than you. They're rolling for Jhin on level 5 and you are rolling faster than them. So if you have a good spot for it, you probably can get away with it. But it's a little bit risky. So just, keep it in mind that you probably don't want to overly be committed to it if you can't really hit and you don't have a lot of econ going for you. And then I'm just going to blitz through the rest of these compositions and talk about like why they're sort of downtrending. The first is that Varus, it's not really conducive to play a fast 9 strategy this patch in general, unless you're specifically on like gold subscription to hit a lot of gold or Crab Rave and you get like a bunch of resources. And that's because you are just not going to be able to get online fast enough. You're going to lose so much HP to all the reroll comps that are rolling faster than you. And you need to hit everything. And I mean everything. Like I've seen people hit Varus 2, Braum 2, but they're Cassante 1, TF 1, and they even have Xayah 2 or whatever, and they still lose because they just don't have critical mass. This composition is purely like, do I have too much value, too much power, too many items on different units, like and you can't overcome it. It's still really good if you can get to max cap. It's just really, really, really hard to do so. There's been players who've been trying to do like fast 9 with like Golden Edge Gnar, but I feel like that's not even enough. You would have to start off with something insane, like a upper mobility level up, hit like a Golden Gnar, win streak a little bit, hit a second econ augment, like late game specialist and fire sale. Just like fast 9, like you have 80 gold at level 9 in stage 4, and even then you still might get overwhelmed by the reroll comps. So don't say I never warned you. I've seen a lot of people try fast 9 and it has not gone well. They got very frustrated because they hit so much of the board and they still go like 5th. It's a very bad time for fast 9 right now. Just don't do it. Ashe is just struggling a lot this patch because, well, they nerfed Udyr for one, so it's worse. But it's also a composition that needs very, very specific items. If you don't have exactly like these 5 items of Stoneplate Sterix Titans and then Rageblade Kraken, it feels pretty bad. And it's also like, if you hit these items, shouldn't you just be playing something like Xayah instead? Because you kind of have similar items like Rageblade Kraken and Stoneplate plus Titans. It feels like very similar to Rakan. So it's like Rakan and Xayah is cheaper, it's faster, it's more efficient, it's less tilting because you don't hit Ashe. Like you kind of need to play this if you're really far ahead and you have Ashe items. But other than that, I wouldn't really lean towards it. I think, in fact, the more consistent version of this composition is Juggernaut Ashe because it feels like you're less item dependent. You can just slam like Rageblade Kraken on Gnar, win streak, and then look for Juggernaut Ashe. But again, it kind of gets run over by a lot of reroll comps, so just keep that in mind. Kayle Jace is also reasonable, but it is just really expensive, and it's really hard to hit Jace 3. I think the number one problem with this is that Jace is contested with all the heavyweight stuff, so you're unlikely to hit. But it's still solid if you can get there. And I'm a big believer in Kayle Jace if you're uncontested and you can hit it. It's just hard to get there. Kog'Maw is still artifact gated. He just feels like the backline version of Viego, but even more conditional. And you have to play some of the most contested frontline in the game. It's really hard to actually hit some of these protectors now because there's so much protected reroll thanks to fan service, crew snipers, and just like other things too. Like if they play like Malzahar, Wraith Flex, they're going to pick like Nico and Cassante. So it's just hard to hit your front line. I don't think Kog'Maw can get there consistently. But if you start off with Lulu at the beginning of the game and you're not playing a Kaisa spot for Rammus, this is a pretty reasonable thing to chase. And I've seen it do really well in tournament and on ladder. So something to think about if you get a Kog'Maw early. Oh, look for Fairy Tail, I think, over Caretaker now. I think Caretaker with the Protector nerfed is worse, so we'll have to make an adjustment there. Last but not least, 7 Mech looks good in the stats, and I can't tell if that's because it's like left over from Lucian reroll and like other high roll stuff, or it's just because it's actually good. And now some people might be saying, well, come on, like you're playing a 5-cost vertical, like of course it looks good. Like, if you hit Gwen and you're filtering for Soul Fighter, it looks good in the stats as well. But the reality is, there's a little bit more to it than that. I think there's some legitimacy in 7 Mech, but the stats indicate that it's like way too good to be considered a C tier comp compared to some of this other stuff, but not entirely sure when to play it. So It's going to be hard. This is one of the things where it's less figured out, but I think as far as I know, the big thing is that Karma wants blue buff because blue buff is really strong, and you want Void Staff on her. Blue buff, Void Staff, and Death Cap, and that's kind of hard too. You need 3 tiers and 2 rods. It's probably more of a fast 9 composition now that I think about it than fast 8. Because it feels like you do need to get to Yone. Otherwise, you're better off just like rerolling Drift, Duo Lucian or something. To give a shout out for some of the rest of the comps here, Lux is a composition that's like rising currently in the ranks. And this is like basically a hybrid version of like Soul Fighter with Lux Reroll and Viego Reroll. So if you go for Lux 3, some people are having success climbing Challenger. Want to give a shout out because it's like a new thing that's come up for this patch and people are figuring it out. I think Lux best in slot is mana gain, so it's Shojin blue buff, Nashers, and Jewel Gauntlet. And you want to go for the Shine Brighter power up on her. If you don't get it early, you can try some other stuff like Efficient, Solar Breath, Heart of Gold. These are like things that you can play for. And the second thing is that Socialite is good on Swain. If you get Socialite on Xin Zhao, he is also your main tank, so you have to kind of be like moving him all around. And that gets like really tricky. So you might not want Socialite on your Xin Zhao. You might want it on your Swain. Hero augments are actually all playable. I think that Zac and Mundo are the best by far. The buffs to Wraith really help Zac, and he pretty much wants the same as before, which is crit and Edge of Night. Make sure you go for that. And then you always try to push levels and look for 6 Wraith. Very similar to what Kayle wants to do. And then give him the chair Mundo. They just buffed this like a lot. They gave it less mana and more range, so now he just does a lot. And I think Vi is a really good 2 cost to play around too. They buffed her as well. So they buffed Vi and Mundo. They buffed the Luchador aspect of it. It's just really, really good. So overall, I would say that these are the 2 best hero augments. The stats on Kenny Hero Augment are really good. They actually buffed this as well pretty significantly. I'm not sure if it's because of Protagonist, like the Prismatic Augment that gives you the 1 cost hero augment, but I do think it's actually pretty good. I think that I'm only going to click it, though, if I have reasonable AP items to get to, because you kind of want this specific build. You want like 2 rods, 2 bows, a sword, and a glove, because Giant Slayer is like really, really strong right now. So I only would click that if I think I have a good spot for it, because Kennen might be hard to hit, especially if there's like a lot of Protector players. Like there's a fan service player that's going to hold on to Protectors, and Crew Sniper. Shen Hero Augment is actually a lot better as well. They buffed this. It's just 6 Bastion. This is the one that I think is like pretty underrated, because no one's really buying Bastion since like Yuumi in Prodigies are not very popular. So you should be able to hit this. You want a lot of bows, though. The hard thing about Shen is you need an awful specific amount of bows. So just keep that in mind. It is a pretty reasonable comp, though, if you can get to it. And the last thing that I want to talk about is that Malphite and Garen are rated at C, but they actually can do well if you have their specific build. The itemization has changed. The rework to Nashers is actually really good on Malphite, specifically with crit. So we've seen some people build like Nashers, Jewel Gauntlet, and healing, like Bloodthirster or Hand of Justice. That's really good. The other is to go Shojin on it. Shojin is really good for Malphite with Titan's Bloodthirster, and that's also really good on Garen as well. So just want to highlight those last bit things, because I think these hero augments are pretty underrated. If you have the good items for them, they can actually do really well. All right, whew, that was a lot of TFT apps, so hopefully you caught some of that. If not, just come back to the video and watch different parts of it. And I didn't even cover like all different compositions. And also things might continue to develop as the patch goes on, because there's one thing that's true about this set, is that every time we think this is what the patch is, a new busted power gets discovered, and the new composition throws the meta into a loop, because we discover like more interactions that are really OP and obscene. So make sure to check out all the updates on our website, TFTAcademy.com, for the comps tier list, so you can get all the up-to-date information about the patch and the meta. Good luck on the climb. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.